When we think about the topic of safety, we have to start with the fact that we know churches are called to be places of worship, welcome, refuge, and hope. But part of faithfully shepherding God's people also means thinking wisely about their care, and that includes safety and preparedness. We've probably had maybe an incident in our own church where we're wondering about a guest or something that may or may not have happened is large, but we see on the news and other places where things take place and we want to make sure we're being wise. So tonight's conversation really isn't driven by fear, headlines, or reaction. It's simply driven by stewardship. We know that scripture calls us to shepherd our flocks, not anxiously, not aggressively, but wisely and lovingly. So that's why we've called tonight's Protecting the Flock, Thinking Wisely About Church Security. Our goal is not necessarily to turn our churches into fortresses, but to help churches become thoughtful, prepared, and peaceful environments where ministry can flourish. So I'm grateful to be joined tonight by Richard Beauvais, founder and president of Elite Defense Group here in Massachusetts. Thanks for being on tonight, man.
I appreciate it, Logan. Thank you.
Absolutely. His team works with businesses, schools, faith-based organizations to help them prepare proactively, train their people well, and create safe, welcoming environments without overreaction or paranoia. So I'm excited to spend some time more with him tonight. I've been through one of his classes as well as some other people that I know. And so we're excited about this. And I think it's going to be a good opportunity for everybody on and for those that'll watch later. So, Richard, let's set this up just a little bit. Let's get a big picture moment. From your experience, why is it important for churches to think intentionally about security today, even if nothing has happened at their church before?
Well, Logan, I think safety isn't something you build after an incident. It's something you establish before one ever happens, right? Most churches that experience a serious incident didn't think it would happen to them. It's not negligence, it's human nature, right? The reality is churches are open, welcoming environments. That's part of this beauty, but it also creates vulnerability, thinking intentionally about security. It's not about fear, it's about stewardship. Churches plan for fire drills, medical emergencies, weather events, not because they expect disaster, but because caring for people means being prepared to protect them in the unexpected.
So, some pastors may worry that talking about safety and security and these things may create unnecessary concern from their congregation. Do you feel that that's true, or do you think the opposite?
I definitely understand that concern. I hear it often. Preparation and faith are not opposites, they work together. Scripture is full of examples of wisdom, watchfulness, and responsibility. Nehemiah rebuilt the wall and posted guards. Jesus told his disciples to be aware of their surroundings, right? Situational awareness is huge. Security isn't about fear, it's about love. It's about protecting families, children, volunteers, staff, so they can worship freely and without distraction. A safe environment allows ministry to flourish.
Yeah, I think that's so important, right? We want to create a safe environment for everyone so that ministry can flourish, so the gospel can go forth, have that
Mm.
impact. So it's not about paranoia then, it's just simply about being prepared, right?
I mean, being paranoid means expecting the worst to happen at any moment. Being prepared means acknowledging reality and having a plan if something does.
Yeah, and I think
Um,
that's so important, right?
it is.
Especially with what things we see even today is that we don't want to live in fear, but we also want to be wise about it, right?
Right. I think, preparation brings calm, not fear. When people know what to do, who to call, and how to respond, chaos decreases and confidence increases. The goal is not to turn churches into fortresses, like you said. It's to remove uncertainty so people can focus on worship, fellowship, and service. Right?
Yeah, that's powerful. Absolutely. So when you're thinking about kind of diving a little bit deeper from the bigger picture, we think about maybe some just basic common gaps that churches don't realize they have. Like, for example, when you walk into a church for the first time, what are the most common safety gaps that you notice right away?
So you walk into the church. Most of the time, I'm looking for their fire escape plan. Right? If you see a fire escape plan on the wall, if there's unsecured or unmonitored entrances, right? A door's locked. Do you have designated entrances? no defined response roles, lack of communication, right? Do you see people with walkie talkies? Um, Often everything's built on good intentions, but not structure in churches.
Why do you think those gaps kind of happen? I know sometimes the issue can really be that maybe there's not enough volunteers or they've just never thought about it before. But have you ever noticed some other reasons why many of those gaps go unnoticed by well meaning churches?
I think it's because nothing's ever happened yet,
Yeah.
right? Most churches are focused on ministry, not risk assessments. It's definitely understandable, but the challenge is that safety gaps are invisible until stress exposes them. Emergencies don't give you time to figure things out. They reveal what's already prepared for or haven't been prepared for. Right? You come into certain emergencies and there's chaos. Right?
Yeah, that's so true. I can recall a story that my wife told me when she was in Vermont. It was a large Christmas Eve service that they had, and they had a medical incident during the middle of the service. And of course, it's dark and the candles are lit, but the team had kinda already planned and prepared and communicated with local EMS what to do, and most of the people there during that Christmas Eve experience had no idea that the woman had fainted, that she had had someone reach to her, EMT got her, and took her out. And so I think that was, again, like you said, all because they had some type of plan that they followed before.
Right.
So if we're thinking about security and not necessarily that it starts with guards, but it starts with people, can you talk about the role maybe of just parking teams, greeters, and ushers in church safety?
So, you know, it's layers, right? You start off with the parking teams. We talk about this a lot. You start with the parking teams. They're the first layer. Now they get to see the vulnerabilities. They get to see people coming in, right? Is somebody rummaging through their car? Um, and then communication is key. So if they're not communicating properly to say the greeters that are at the door, right? Hey, this person is coming in. They look a little agitated. Um, how about we talk to them, right? And then now you have the security team after the fact. So I think making sure that we're layered and we're prepared, and a lot of a lot of churches will put the focus on their security team, but they don't involve their parking team or their greeters, right? Which is dangerous. Everybody needs to be involved to ensure the safety of the church.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about that before, that they all don't have the same roles, but they all can add to safety, security,
Exactly.
even medical things. If you have nurses or
Hmm.
doctors that might be in your church, just each one of those. I can remember a few instances, even in our own church, when the greeters would call up to either me or to someone else on just a simple radio that we had bought and an earpiece, to say, "Hey, we have a new guest. He looks like he's not really sure if he's in the right place. He smells a little bit like he might have had some alcohol and just kinda
Yeah.
in."
Right.
So there's little simple things like that that the whole team and those layers can help with.
Right. And looking at that, we're we're, we're Christians first, right? And um, I had to take a step back sometimes because you do look for stuff like that, right? But coming into the church, and we can't judge, right? But now there has to be people that are watching for this because we don't know what the intentions are. They could be an absolutely broken person coming into church. And now this is when the greeter, or we get a prayer warrior to come and, hey, what's going on? Can we help you? Right. Um, and once those people are able to speak to this person, now we can get a somewhat of an understanding, like, okay, do we need to sit here and watch this person, or are they just absolutely broken and they're just looking for the word of God, you know?
Yeah, that's so good. I think you're starting to kinda on it a little bit, and I may be jumping ahead, but really what we're wanting to do is to teach people at all the layers, to have a better awareness.
Mm,
Whether that's an awareness of how could I serve them, or awareness if there's gonna be a problem, or if there's a situation that might need a little bit of confrontation or guidance. So maybe could you speak just a little bit to just as individuals how we can have some better awareness in that?
Situational awareness is huge. I always tell people, think of your favorite restaurant, right? And I always tell people, don't tell me McDonald's, uh, but think of your favorite restaurant and can you tell me all the exits in that restaurant, right? If something were to happen, everybody, human nature, you're going where you came in, right? So having situational awareness and knowing what's around you, knowing your bubble, um, you want to have your head on a swivel. You want to be looking for any types of signs. You see people coming in, sweating, clenching fists, looking around everywhere. I mean, granted, again, we're Christians and some people may be very nervous walking into church for the first time, right? But that's again, the greeters hold a very crucial role. Um, and we need to make sure that we have the right people in those positions. And it is difficult for some churches. They're a smaller church, and they don't have those. I've met with plenty of pastors and other churches that they're like, hey, we have 20 people in our church right now. So it's I understand that's a difficult position that they're put in, but now it's like, okay, who can we put here to make sure that things can run smoothly and that our sanctuary is covered, right? The people inside our church is covered.
Yeah, that's really good. I think you bring us to a very practical moment, as I'm sure our listeners are beginning to get curious about, okay, where could I start? So, whether we're a church of 12, 20, church plant, established church, 70, 75, what are some of those easy things that a church need to focus on as far as training, things to purchase, preparation? Well, what should they prioritize first? So we can do budgets, and then we'll also look at volunteers. So any size there in those churches, smaller church, if they've got a limited budget, what should they prioritize first as far as gear? I mean, are we talking first aid kits, AEDs? Do we need to have some levels? And then we'll talk about volunteers too.
Absolutely. I talk to a lot of every church should designate one area as like a safe room, right? Just in case something were to happen, especially you bring medical staff uh, onto the team, and I mean every church has somebody in the medical field, right? Whether it be a nurse, a doctor, a CNA, somebody that has some sort of medical experience, you know, and an AED is huge. I mean, medicals are one of the biggest things that we're going to come across inside a church. But you also need to be vigilant on that. Again, we're in 2026. This could be a deterrent, right? I've seen firsthand in a church um, somebody go down in the lobby, and there was a gentleman that walked all the way up through the sanctuary right in front of the pastor, right? He had no ill intentions, but a lot of people didn't know this person. And he was standing face to face with the pastor as the pastor was in mid prayer, right? And that's a scary situation because now the whole security team, because the planning really wasn't there on what would happen if there was a medical emergency, and the planning really wasn't there. And all of the security staff were hovered around the person that needed medical attention, right? Now, this person went all the way up, and if this was some sort of an attack, now this person's inside the sanctuary face to face, right up at the stage with the pastor, right? So making sure the teams have their posts, and now somebody goes down, we have somebody that's designated in the medical staff that somebody can go and get and be like, hey, we just had somebody go down. We need to call 911. Can you assess them until EMS comes? And the security stays at their posts.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I've heard you say plenty of times before, but really what this hitting on is really there's a need for good communication in the church. And that's
Yes.
not like us running around going to the upper sanctuary level or the basement, but simple radios and communication can help
Yes.
a lot. Do you feel like that is often the largest weakness of churches? Is that maybe they've thought about this, but there's no way to execute on any type of plan?
Right. Communication is huge. Um, if you have somebody in the parking lot, right, and they see something and they have zero communication to be able to get to somebody that's inside the church and they see somebody going to the church to cause some type of harm, right? There's nothing that can be done. Um, having, I mean, you can go on Amazon for $100 and get 15 radios with earpieces. Um, and that right there is going to save, it's going to save lives. It's going to save time. That's not just for a violent incident. That's for, hey, what if there's a medical? What if a child went missing? Right now, we're in real time. If a child went missing, the security team's already trained for that now, and they're going to their specific posts for that specific incident. Right, um, and we're designating somebody. Hey, who's going to be the designated person to call 911? Right, but we also got to know that the church security team is the proactive source. Now, the average for Massachusetts for police to arrive at any situation is 8 to 12 minutes. So you are it. You are there to protect that house.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really important as you highlight that. I've heard you say it before too, that everything defensive is muscle memory.
Yes.
I think you're kind of playing on that already a little bit. What does that kind of flesh out to be in a church context?
So, I mean, it's training. You know, I look at many churches. I go into many churches and do assessments and training security teams, and a lot of them are just standing at a post, right? That they're not walking back and forth. They're not understanding that they need to be fully aware of what's going on. So, say, um, say your church allows firearms, right? Just because you have a license to carry a firearm doesn't mean you're proficient with a firearm. There should be training involved. um, your emergency action planning that should be gone through. We do. I know I talk about this in all of my protecting the house of worship classes, but where we're at the point of we do men's breakfast, we do women's breakfast, right? With the security team should be meeting up once or twice a month outside of service, and they should be training. They should be doing tabletop exercises. They should be learning how to stop the bleed. Um, they should be running through different scenarios, and that's gonna build that muscle memory because you can't execute where your mind has never gone before, right? It's like if you're driving on the highway and you see a 5 car pile up and are white knuckling the steering wheel and you're slamming on your brakes, right? Because we've learned a thing or two driving in New England, um, with defensive driving, right? But you're not going to be able to throw your seatbelt on in that moment. But if you drive every single day to and from work and all you're doing is buckling and unbuckling your seatbelt, you most likely are going to be able to do so, right? Because you're building that muscle memory. So learning all the exits, learning your post, right? Everyone should pretty much be at the same post every time they're in church. That's their post. They know it inside and out, right? They know where they should be monitoring. Um, Anything that's going on. They're talking on the walkies. If Depending on some churches will have the children upstairs for the morning worship, and then they dismiss the kids to go either downstairs or upstairs. Um, and anytime that happens, I always tell the security teams if the kids are on the move, call it out. Kids are coming down, or kids are going to class. Right, that way everyone's vigilant. Prior to, you have staff walking the premises of where the kids are going to be going, making sure all the doors are locked, making sure there's nobody inside these rooms. Because obviously the children are the softest target. And what we want to do in churches is 90% of churches are soft targets. And we want to make it a hard target. And that's not just any type of weaponry or anything like that. That's just full preparedness.
Mhm. Yeah, I think as much as churches like to think they are shepherding well, I do think that we forget that there are wolves and there is evil in this world. So I think some of the easy wins that I heard for our listeners that you gave us are definitely making sure you have some type of communication system,
Yes.
especially between ushers or greeters, as you're building your security team, maybe even in the AV booth if they're watching security cameras somewhere, with your kids' ministry leaders, those hospitality type greeters, everyone, as you said, in those layers can be added as a part of that in addition to some medical things, just some normal preparedness things, if there was an incident. I've seen even situations where in some of our churches, we have older church buildings, and maybe some of them have balconies or the AV booth is on the second floor. And they've had code cards for the pastor or the worship team to know, hey, this is going to happen, or this is happening, we're monitoring this. But then what about like if an incident does happen? Like how important is clarity of roles? Say you do have someone who is carrying in your church and your team knows about that and something does happen and you're notifying 911. What are kind of some simple things we got to keep in mind if an incident does happen?
Um, so I think it's critical when roles are defined, people hesitate, right? If they're not defined, they hesitate. Everyone tries to do everything at once. That creates confusion and delays, right? When roles are defined, responses become calm and controlled. People know who leads, who calls 911, right? People are designated for this. Who assists the children? Who manages the congregation? That clarity can prevent panic and save lives, right? And again, that goes to the preparation. I mean, where and I know I say this a lot too is, we go to church on Sundays, some go Saturdays, but it's you worship one day a week, and we don't just go to a completely different life Monday to Saturday, right? And as a security member, we need to keep that at the forefront because again, we are the shepherds of the church, right? So we need to be making sure that we're doing the trainings. I mean, it doesn't have to be at the church. It can be over Zoom, going over things, right? What do you think that we could have did better, right? There needs to be a lot of communication with the security team.
Yeah, that's great. I think those are really, really helpful. We kind of hit on this in the beginning, and you have throughout and done a really good job with it. But I know that sometimes pastors, they may fear that talking about these things may make your church feel cold or unwelcoming. But if you're trying to have a healthy security culture, don't you think that it's an advantage to say not only do we care about your soul, but we care about you practically?
Yes. So, um, a lot of pastors have to walk a fine line. Um, it's I know a lot of pastors will put the the security in the hands of the head of security. They don't want to be. It's not that they don't want to be involved in it, but there's we have all aspects and all different types of beliefs inside church, right? And the pastors, even though they may feel one way, but they also that line that they have to follow, they have to stay very gray. Um, and that's not just to please both sides of beliefs, but um it's more so of just leaving it to the security and hoping that the security is going to do what you're hoping for them to do, but there's many pastors that are um they're not just a community pastor, right? They travel, they go outside of the country. I know a pastor that travels very often to Turkey, Syria, just very very unwelcoming to the Christian faith, right? Um, and I asked him, I said, "What do you do for security when you're out there?" And he said, "I pray." And I said, "That is fantastic." I said, "But there's places out there that will literally revoke your passport for being a religious leader, right?" And that's scary stuff, you know. But it's reality, and that they're gonna push the word of God. I mean, tell everybody, right? No matter where. And it's noble, but I think that there also needs to be a lot of preparation, because that also can put a big target on your church. And that's where the security really needs to step it up and understand, like, listen, our church has a big target on it, right? Um, and it's a lot of the congregation don't understand that, right?
Mhm.
They don't understand the fact that they're going out, and they could be being told by a higher source, like, no, we're reading the book from here. We're not that this is what you're gonna say. And when that's not how they want to go about it, things can turn south very fast.
Yeah. Yeah. So that actually leads me to the question that I have, but I've also seen come up even as people were registering for this, is how does a pastor, how does a church communicate that we're being prepared, we're working towards preparedness, we are preparedness, without basically getting up on a Sunday morning and saying, look, there are concealed carry people here, we have insurance, there's a team, and going through all these lists. How do we, churches and leaders, just communicate that we've got a plan to keep you safe? And we're going to do the best of our ability.
Mhm.
Or do you tell them everything?
Right. And like, basically, without alarming the congregation. And you're framing it as care, not fear. Language matters, right? Focus on stewardship, preparedness, and loving people well. Training can happen quietly behind the scenes, just like fire drills or medical readiness. The goal isn't to create anxiety; it's to create confidence. I go into churches. My team goes into churches, even other entities, and you know, people literally come over and shake our hand and say, "We've never felt so safe in church."
All right. Yeah.
Right? And to hear that, it's warming, um, because you shouldn't have to fear going to church, right? That shouldn't be a thing. But the sad reality is, uh, it's up to the leadership to really take it by the horns and push for the security teams and the layers of security and the preparation.
Yeah, that's great. I would say the same thing as a pastor who helps other churches in revitalization. Just because you're not skilled at something doesn't mean that it doesn't need attention. And even if you're not passionate about it. So I think that's really great. So if we can give maybe just three takeaways to a pastor watching tonight and thinking, we haven't done much at all, what are just two or three practical steps they could take in the next 30 and 60 days?
I think they need to identify at least a small safety response team. Um, Create a simple emergency action plan, right? What are we going to do in this instance? And this needs to be available to everyone, right? People need to know, all the staff need to know, what are we going to do in this instance, right? Because we can't build it and just leave it in the dark and be like, yeah, we have one. Um, but putting that action plan, and you also send that to your local police department so they know your plan, right? Because when they do show up, they have an idea of what you guys already have in place. and provide basic awareness training for the volunteers. You know, you'd be surprised on how many volunteers actually want the training, that they want to serve in that way.
Yeah, it's a great way. I've seen even in some churches they focus on re-engaging their men, husbands, dads, those guys. That's a good place for them for
Mhm.
many cases. So,
Yeah.
your action plan that you mentioned now you would say that would include medical, fire, incidents. If someone's being disruptive, just kind of have a plan for each one of those, right?
Right.
Okay.
And especially missing children.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, that can happen. And the biggest thing is, most incidents, especially someone coming to take, I mean, this can be anything. This can be somebody that comes in and has an agenda to grab a child. Um, but it could also be a custody dispute, right? Things
Mm,
that we just
yeah.
really don't think of. But hey, I know that this my child is here, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go get them. A lot of churches now, though, are name tags, and you have to have the barcode that matches your child's name tag for them to pick them up, even if they know you. I mean, you can go to Bible study with them, but they're still at, hey, I need that. I need that sticker, right? Because that is their job, that is their service, and they're doing it the way they're supposed to. It's not like, oh yeah, I know you, right? Can't do that. Um, and if a child's missing, you call it over the comms, and it's, hey, we have a missing child. Now the security team is already planned. They've already trained for this. Now there's two people, right, that instantly go outside and block the entrances and the exit. No cars leave, right? That should be the main focus. And now people are searching inside the church for this child. But now we've stopped anybody from leaving the premises with a child. Um, our team, we get together with Black Ops Tactical, and uh, we do the security for Hillfest, right? We had many missing children throughout this, and it was mostly kids going to the front of the stage to see Megan Woods or Ben Fuller, and they were missing their children. But at that point, we were stopping cars that were leaving, and we were going to the extent of popping trunks, searching cars to make sure that there was nobody getting taken, right? Um, but the thing we really got to think of is, these aren't random acts, right? These people that come in to do any type of harm or anything like that, they've been here before. They know the layout, right? So this is why we're getting churches to, I mean, my church is very family oriented, right? Very involved in, you're we pretty much know everybody that walks through those doors. So when you start seeing somebody show up and then they show up another week and they're starting to look a little off, it starts raising a little flag, and you just go up and, hey, how you doing? Like, we're glad you're here, right? Small talk, and kind of feel them out a little bit. And then if they come back now and you didn't get a good feeling, right? We're not going to turn them away. It's church. So we're just going to watch. We're going to make sure that they're being watched. Um, Make sure they're not coming in with a duffel bag or something like that, right? Dressed completely odd, but we're keeping a close eye on people that we may have some questions about.
Sure. You had mentioned earlier about looping in your local police department. At what point should a church consider bringing in outside expertise, like the police department, like someone with you and your training and your team, or any other professional support?
Mhm. So, um, bringing the police department is one thing. A lot of police departments aren't trained for something like this. I've heard different stories. and there's been one that I heard of tying a knot on a rope and putting it on the outside of the door and holding the door shut. That's not a recommendation, right? Um, and having somebody that uh, has familiar that's familiar with a church, that's huge, right? We've had several people come in and they wanted to uh, be able to teach the protecting the house of worship curriculum, and they have no idea how a church operates, right? You can't say I'm going to be a mechanic tomorrow and I'm going to start removing transmissions with zero experience in it, right? Because you're giving people advice that is literally life changing, and if you don't give them the proper advice, we could lose people, right? So we want to make sure that we're bringing in the proper people, the proper businesses that are giving good advice and what can actually happen.
Yeah.
Um, I know in a lot of my classes, I'm very blunt, right? You guys seen it firsthand. We had a packed house in my office. Um, a lot of people were sitting on the floor, right? But that was God speaking, like, hey, we need to protect our churches, right? And I know a lot of people leave with a lot of good information, but having 3 or 4 people come in and try and reiterate that to the congregation or the leadership is very difficult. That they're taking your word, but you could say the same exact thing, and then I come into your facility and I say it, and they take it a completely different way. Like, no, we need to do this, right?
Yeah.
Like this guy kind of makes sense, but you said the same exact thing, right?
Right.
It's same thing like with our spouses. We can tell them something absolutely fantastic, right? And they don't want to hear it, but they hear the same thing from someone else, and it's a great idea,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. Yeah,
it's
pastors
it,
get that same
it's
thing all the time. Guest pastor comes in. So
exactly.
that I hear what you're saying, that we really do need to include people, like yourself and others who have the expertise to work on safety, security, incidents, preparedness in church context, but really, really talk and lead with the pastor to make sure that he's behind it, just
Yes.
like you would do a mission project or anything else. So that's super key, and I'm glad that as we kind of end the training portion here of that, you're going to land with, man, it's got to take vigilance from the pastor down
Mhm.
for sure, from those executive leaders. So here's what I want to do
Yes.
fun. Richard, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of do lightning round a little bit with each one of these
Yeah.
questions. I think this is a great one to start with. How can you get people involved in church security when you have an overall older demographic or an older congregation with no trained volunteers?
It is difficult. I mean, if it's an older demographic, I'm sure we have some prior military, right? Um, it doesn't matter your age. Having some situational awareness and understanding uh, the exits of your church and understanding how your church operates, right? Um, I mean, you work if if you have a parking team, you can put them out there before the service starts, and right before the service starts, they can all go inside, right? Greeters, you can minimize the amount of greeters, but you can also minimize how many entrances you have, right? So now, if there's only one entrance, you only need one greeter right there, and then once the service starts, that greeter can go right back into the sanctuary. They're not missing service. This comes a lot with churches that only have one service. Obviously, you're serving, but you also want to hear the word for the day. But these people can eventually slide out of there and go into the sanctuary. And now you could have, depending on the size of the building or whatnot, you can have 1 or 2 security. I usually always ride with the fact of having 2. And the second one they can alternate going inside the sanctuary, right? But you always want somebody patrolling around, checking windows. If you're walking by windows, you can see mostly all the parking lots, checking everything. So you're basically looking outside of the premises, you're looking inside the premises, you're walking, you're checking doors that are supposed to be locked. But you also want to keep an eye on the main entrance that is actually open for anybody that's coming in late.
That's great. So I think I've kind of got this from a lot of what you're saying tonight is it's a building process, right?
It
So
is.
maybe you're not going to have a full security team and the budget and things for that, but you can
Right.
start with greeters. Who's
Yep.
watching people as they come in, who's at the doors, who's with the kids. So in a way, you kind of already have a security team start 'cause you've got
Right.
engagement leaders, you've got people that are, doing AV or your hospitality team, so starting with having conversations with them,
Yes.
they'll
So
already
so
get it, right?
I the tough thing is when you have a greeter, right? You go to church and you walk in and the greeter's happy to see you and they're shaking your hand, your eye contact, you're talking, and there's people walking by you, right? At that point, it's how you doing? Great to see you, but you're situationally aware. That is the biggest thing. Like if you're a smaller church, you want somebody that's situationally aware. You're not taking the full role of a greeter, but if you're standing at the door, you're trying to play both roles at the same time. So you're being the smiling face, right? But your head is on a swivel. Um, you don't want to put your guard down either. With the bigger churches, I always tell them, when you have those layers, your security team shouldn't be the ones sitting there talking to people. Um, but if that is your only option, right? And you have to adapt. You just have to adapt to the situation, but you need somebody there that is going to be able to see everything, right? Now, if you have two greeters, and now you have one at the door and one uh, right when you actually walk into the lobby or the sanctuary, and now you have that second layer, right? But you always want to have people that can see for any type of signs of what's going on, right?
Well, that's good. I appreciate that, kinda clarifying that if you can start somewhere, you can start with them.
Right.
Hopefully, you build and work your way up.
Mm.
What about so we're thinking of greeters and hospitality team and those entering the door. What about demonstrators or a small group that may come into church looking to create a disturbance? How can we prevent that kind of stuff? How can we deter as you've talked about before?
We try and look at it as they're coming in to cause a disturbance. And hopefully this is at a bigger church, right? Um, but if so, I mean, we need to have the ability to, okay, we have the ability to lock a door, right? And that's when we got to call the local police. You lock the doors and let the local police come because they're coming in to cause the disturbance. But you also want to have a team that's able to de-escalate a situation, right? I know in St. Paul there was a lot of political stuff involved in what was going on in that entry. Um, from my experience, especially in New England, most pastors don't touch base on the political aspect of things. Um, they don't give their insight on what's going on um, with the protesting and all the political stuff, which we shouldn't have to, right? But it is the reality. We are looking at changing times, and we do have to be prepared. The situational awareness. Um, we do have to make sure that we're uh, we're able to differentiate who's coming in to cause a disturbance, And I mean, most time people come in protesting, they have some sort of sign or something like that, right? We're not a judgment free, we're a judgment free zone, right? Um, but we also have a right to sit there and assemble and have our time inside God's house. But my biggest thing is lock the doors, right? Call local PD. Hey, we have a lot of people standing out here protesting our church. And let's face it, Christianity is the religion that is being attacked the most in the United States right now. And that's why preparation for any scenario is key.
Yeah. I can remember when I first came to First Baptist, the doors were like an immediate thing for me that all the doors to the building were just left unlocked the entire
Mm,
time. And there was no greeters downstairs or at the side door for any of that.
right.
And you had some who, thought the doors need to be open the whole time we're there and just completely
Yes.
unlocked.
But
And so what
but
do you
you
do about that? What do you do?
but with the doors,
Yeah. When
um,
somebody's we gotta be welcoming, we gotta have them
right,
unlocked.
right. Um, you know, if so, right? I mean, obviously, people coming in, as we see, and a lot of this isn't too peaceful right now when this is happening. So, I mean, my advice is don't confront them. Don't confront the protesters physically, right? Keep the de-escalation your priority. An aggressive response can escalate the situation and create legal exposure, which that's the last thing we want. Um, Document everything safely. Attempt to record video, audio from a distance, right? We don't want to be getting too close. Um, and this was going to support the law enforcement in what's going on, because again, you're looking at 8 to 10 minutes. Um, and invoke your rights calmly. Remind demonstrators that it's a place of worship. Invite them to speak with leadership outside of the service. Um, and then engage the law enforcement early. Have a direct line or a code word with local police, the security to respond if protesters refuse to leave or pose a threat, right? Um, Before an incident, prepare a communications plan. Who speaks to the congregation to reassure the people during and after? People are going to be nervous to even leave, right? Um, but you want to train your volunteers on non-confrontational language and who's going to call the law enforcement. We need to have somebody designated, because we can't have people panicking and you got 30 people calling 911 on an incident, right? So it's okay, Logan, you were the responsible one to call 911 if this is were to happen, right? Because you're going to have so much panic, because when this chaos comes in, everyone's minds are going crazy because of what we see worldwide, right? We don't know what these people, this whole group of people are coming in to do, right? So it's definitely get law enforcement involved, have some de-escalation tactics, have some of your security stand at that door like, guys, this is a house of worship, right? Um, we'll gladly bring some of the leadership out after service, like let these guys finish the service, and we will gladly talk to you afterwards, right?
Yeah, I think that's really good, really helpful, even thinking about who's gonna engage, how they're gonna engage,
Right.
because we think it's never gonna happen, and so, again, we're not prepared in it.
Exactly.
What about and this one may be a little bit harder. I thought about this one interesting too as a church planter or a pastor using a public building or meeting in a school. What are just some kind of bullet point simple things that they can do that since it's not their building to control entirely, how do they work with that?
Um, so if you're partnering with a host facility, I mean, meet with the building managers and owners. Confirm what security measures are allowed. Do they have things? Do they have access control? Right? Access control is huge. Um, What staffing do they require? What emergency protocols and exits? Because this is their building, so we need to abide by what their emergency action plan is for that building, right? Um, know where the fire extinguishers are, the lockdown procedures, communication pathways. I mean, in a way, churches that are in other people's buildings kind of have it made because everything's should be already laid out, right? It should be already laid out, but that's something that uh, leadership should be talking to the person they're renting from, like what is already laid out for us. You know, should be maximizing a small volunteer pool. Um, where we should be training, going back to the smaller churches. Um, maximizing a small volunteer pool, training broadly, scheduling sparingly, rather than expecting volunteer guards every week. Rotate a core team. Um, creating simple roles. Not everyone has to be a security team member. You can have a floor watch, a parking lot observer with a clear, short checklist. Um, and then leverage the technology. Even with a small team, I mean, inexpensive cameras, check-in alerts, door alarms, simple messages to the groups that can create and increase situational awareness.
Yeah, so technology, different layers of people, and simple checklists. I mean, I've personally even found that the smaller you break up tasks, the more you can spread that workload and the more people will want to get involved. And it won't be feeling so overwhelming like I'm the one that's going to respond if there's a shooting incident or a medical incident, but we have a whole team of people that kind of have different roles. So that's great.
Exactly, and I mean, going back to um, the the once a week or the once a month trainings. You got your team, and 1 week you're going over planning. You're building that emergency action plan. The next week or the next month you're going over um, what you do in certain incidents, right? And then you're running a half speed exercise. Like you go over the comm. Hey, there's somebody down on the east wing, or there's somebody coming through the gymnasium door, um, and putting people in their places and having the proper people go and assess the situation. But again, you don't want to have other people leaving their posts because you don't know if that's a deterrent. So you don't want your whole team rushing to this one person. It's like football. You Drake May gives a fake handoff, and the whole team rushes the running back, but Drake May still has the ball, right? So we need to be prepared. I had to
That's
bring the
great.
Patriots into it. It's a lovely thing, right?
Hey, we're doing it for sure. That's great. Hey, so you had mentioned this before, and I know this has been a question that popped up. Can you talk just a little bit about liability, if an incident does happen with the security team, insurance needs, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. A good thing is the USCCA. The USCCA is incredible. They're good for volunteer. Um, they're uh, a protection insurance, right? Um, and anybody that's interested in that, we can talk more about that. But they offer the insurance. I mean, in the state of Massachusetts, in a defensive situation, you're looking at $252,000 just to bond out. And then for a lawyer just to look at your case, you're looking at $40,000 to $70,000 just for them to look at your case. I mean, if anyone watched the Karen Reed case, she was in there over a dozen times. You're looking at over $1 million, right? But general legal principles, duty of care, churches may have a duty to act responsibly to keep congregants safe, right? But overstepping can create exposure. Use of force, avoid physical force unless it's legally justified within your local law, right? And I mean, most of New England, especially Massachusetts, you have to be in absolute immediate danger for you
Yes.
to stand your ground, right? And you have to. We also have the right to flee law, right? But if somebody is an immediate threat, and you have to take action, legally you would be okay. But you need some sort of insurance like the USCCA because, again, this is Massachusetts and we're guilty until proven innocent in a defensive situation. Um, but some states interpret defensive force very, very narrowly. Too much force can lead to criminal and civil liability, and that can fall on the church also. But that's why the USCCA is so big, because now um, they're covering the person that was doing the protecting, right? So now the church isn't going to be fully liable. I'm sure there could be some civil, right? But anything criminal or anything like that is going to, the USCCA is going to cover that. So, I mean, it's huge. And the USCCA, when you become a member, they have hundreds of hours of trainings, that you can learn, and you can gain certificates and um, get you the proper trainings that you need. And I mean, as you know, we offer a ton of different trainings for self-defense and, um, making sure that everyone is legally sound. Um, but the best practices to reduce liability, policies and documents,
Yeah.
right? Have a written security procedure, incident reports. This shows proactive risk management, training requirements, right? Because in the court of law, when something happens, they want a finger to point. And they're going to look at the church and say, what was your emergency action plan? Every business, every church, every school, they all should have an emergency action plan. Now, they're going to say, what did you have for security measures? Oh, well, we have a volunteer security team. What kind of trainings do they have? We need a paper trail, right? And if you say, no, they're just volunteers, they just hang out over here and this is what happened, they're going to go, well, you were liable, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like, you're liable. Like, it's, and it's sad because so many places, I mean, this is all businesses, faith-based institutions, schools, they look at security as just a box to check, and security should be the forefront, right? Because you're protecting everybody inside that building. You're protecting your business. You're protecting your building, right? I mean, there's been so many churches that have closed down because there has been a violent incident and they couldn't pay for it, right? But you also got to look at it as, if a violent incident happens inside the church, say um, somebody gets injured pretty bad, or even worse, they lose their life, um, and people seen that, right? You're not only looking at that situation, but now the 40 to 150 people that were inside that church now have PTSD, and all those civil suits are coming, right? So there's a lot. I mean, security is ideal, and the trainings are a necessity. Um, but for training requirements, only deploy volunteers after they've completed a standardized training curriculum. If your team's carrying a firearm, right? Just because you have an LTC doesn't make you somebody that is able to carry a firearm, right? There should be a training in place. In a couple of churches that we work with, it's um, they get their LTC, and I will meet with them at the range, and they have to qualify, right? Because you don't want somebody that thinks it's the wild, wild west. And I mean,
Right.
you bring it up in church. The pastor brought it up at the pew at one of the churches. We're looking for security, which I told him, because he was like, I don't have a lot of people that are interested in the security, or we don't know if they are. And I said, so tell them at the pew at the end of service, hey, if you're looking to serve on the security team, we're going to have a table outside of the service, and you can sign up, right? Um, but that goes to the fact of, you don't want to just bring anybody on the security team either, right?
Yeah.
Again, there should be layers to that. So uh, there should be people, okay, you're interested in the security team? Well, we're going to start you off on traffic, and then we'll work you to a greeter. And then we're going to work you to the security team, because you don't want to bring somebody in and now they have the floor plans of your church. They have all of your planning, and this person's been in your church for 3 weeks, right? could be a big red flag, because now they know the ins and the outs and they know your plan. Okay. But insurance, confirm your liability coverage, um, especially the accommodations for security team activities, right? I know there's several churches that actually have this insurance, and just to make sure, because they're carrying firearms, but there's so many different options, right? They have the burners. Um, Anybody who's looking or interested in those, we can get really good discounts on those. But they're a non-lethal. Um, it's CO2 powered, and it shoots polymer balls and pepper spray balls, right? And they're legal in every state, all 50 states, um, and anybody can carry it as long as they're 18 plus. And I mean, I know a lot of us back in the day, right, when we used to freeze our paintballs, that's what it feels like. It hurts real bad. So, I mean, that's another option. If you don't want firearms inside your church, you can go to that point. Um, Pepper spray, right? I'm on the fence with pepper spray and tasers, because, like I said before, anything defensive is muscle memory. And how often are you training with that pepper spray,
Sure, sure.
right? How are you going to be able to get that in that specific moment and not spray yourself in the face? Right?
Or one of
So,
the other congregants.
exactly.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so I think, man, you gave some really great things, talking about insurance and liability, but then also those game plans, some less lethal
Yeah.
options. You know, we just started incentivizing for our security team as we're building it that if they weren't already covered by USCCA, that the church would pay for them to be covered in that. So we can do things like that to build. And man, Richard, I really just thank you for all this wisdom. I'm sure you could go on, and I do
Oh,
hope people reach out to you for further training. I
yeah.
know Sandy's got some other trainings that we've done in the past on maybe a little bit different topics, but they're worth checking out on YouTube too. But I appreciate the big message that you gave us, is that this reminder for preparation, that it's not a lack of faith. It's not trying to make people afraid, but it's simply an expression of love. As pastors and leaders, we're called to shepherd people
Mm,
and not just preach sermons. And
absolutely.
so that includes all this training, thinking ahead. And so I appreciate you being on with us tonight.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And if you want to support our work in New England, you'll find a link in the description.